My name is Thea Warren. I'm 34 and I've spent 9 years as a hospice nurse, helping strangers leave this world with more kindness than my own family ever showed me at Christmas. This year, I pulled into my grandfather's driveway at 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and found the house dark, every car gone, every window black except one lamp in the living room, where Grandpa George sat waiting in his rocking chair. On the mantel in my mom's handwriting was a note. We left for Europe. You're staying to take care of Grandpa. My family had flown out that afternoon. All of them. He watched me read it, folded his newspaper, and smiled like a man checking his watch. Ready? He said. I said yes. I had no idea what I was agreeing to. 7 days later, my mother was on her knees on that kitchen floor begging. And the thing that finally broke my family wasn't what Grandpa did that week. It was what I did. Welcome back to Revenge Range, where family secrets come to light and quiet people stop being quiet. Today's story has a note on a mantel, a for sale sign that ended a European vacation, and a rocking chair worth more than anyone in the family ever guessed. If you've ever been the one your family uses instead of loves, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To explain that note, I have to explain how the Warren family works because it does work the way a machine works. My mother, Carol, runs it, not loudly. She runs it the way a plant manager runs a floor. Everyone has a station, and the stations never rotate. My brother Dean, 36, owns a remodeling company and holds the title of Family Success Story, which mostly means nobody asks where his money goes. My dad Rick holds the title of Head of the Household, which mostly means he sits where he's told. And me, I got my station at 16, when my grandmother on Mom's side had her second stroke and came to live with us. Somebody had to do mornings before school, the pills, the washing, the lifting. Somebody turned out to be me. My grandmother lived 11 more years bent into that bed. And by the time she passed, the family had settled a permanent job description over my head like a coat. Thea is the nurse. I went and made it official. Got my RN at 22. Did 3 years on a medsurg floor, then moved to hospice. And I want to be honest, I love the work. I'm good at it. But in my family, loving it became the evidence against me. Every holiday for the past 10 years had an asterisk with my name on it. Thanksgiving, I pushed the wheelchair. Easter, I drove the pharmacy run. Christmas, I kept an eye on. Whoever needed eyes kept on them while everyone else kept an eye on the football game. Nobody ever asked. Asking would have implied there was a question. But this year I had promised myself it would be different. And for once, I hadn't just promised. I'd done something about it. Here's what I did about it. Because I want you to know I saw this coming in November. I called my mother and asked directly what the plan was for Christmas. I got the verbal equivalent of fog. We'll all be together, honey. Just come home. I've interviewed families about a dying person's wishes for 9 years. I know what an answer that isn't an answer sounds like. So I built a backup the way a nurse builds one. I contacted a home care agency I trust professionally, booked a respite aide for 5 days over the holiday, a licensed background check professional to help with Grandpa George, and I paid for it myself. $1,100. I even wrapped it in a card because that was my Christmas gift to the whole family. Nobody has to be on duty this year. Everyone gets to just be family, including me. I confirmed the booking the first week of December. I confirmed it again mid-mon. Then at 9:40 on Christmas Eve, standing in a dark living room holding a note written on the back of a page from the kitchen calendar, I called the AWI's after-hours line, and a very kind coordinator told me the booking had been cancelled on December 20th, by the family contact on file. A woman who identified herself as the daughter-in-law of the client, my mother. The agency did nothing wrong. They notified the contact who can lead, which is how that works. Which is why it worked. My mom hadn't just skipped asking me. She'd found the one door I'd propped open and quietly closed it for days early so the room would be sealed by the time I walked in. Which raised a question. And I stood there turning over while Grandpa's rocking chair creaked behind me. How long had my family been planning this? The note deserves a full reading because my mother wrote it fast, and it still managed to be a masterpiece. Thea, we left for Europe this afternoon. 12 days river cruise. It was Dean's idea, and the deposits were non-refundable. You're staying to take care of Grandpa. His pills are on the counter. Don't let him overdo it. Merry Christmas, Mom. Non-refundable. That word did a lot of lifting. So did the exclamation point. I stood under a Christmas tree nobody had bothered to plug in, holding the back of a calendar page, doing the math. Flights for 6, my parents, Dean, Mackenzie, their 2 kids, plus a Danube River cruise at Christmas prices. Later, I'd learned the number was around $47,000 booked in August. While I was getting fog in November, the cabins were already assigned. And through all of it, from the corner of the living room, came the slow creak of the rocking chair. My grandfather, George Warren, 82 years old, sat by the lamp with the newspaper folded on his knee, and a leather attach case parked against the chair leg that had been told to stay. He didn't look abandoned. I've seen abandoned. It has a smell, a posture. He looked punctual. He looked like a man whose ride had finally shown up. Ready? He asked again. And I said, yes again. And he nodded once, the way he used to nod at a machine part that measured true. Good, he said. We've got a lot to do in 7 days. I remember laughing a little because I thought he was being funny. He was not being funny. Of the 2 people standing in that living room, only one of us had been left behind, and it wasn't him. Christmas morning, we cooked together, which I couldn't remember ever doing with anyone in that house. He made the pork roast from my Grandma Rosie's recipe card, grease-spotted and soft as cloth, and directed me around the kitchen like a foreman who decided I showed promise. And somewhere between the oven and the table, my professional brain caught up with the obvious. This man did not need a nurse. He was 82 and moved like 70. He took 2 medications, both boring. What he actually needed was a driver. He'd had cataract surgery in the fall, and wasn't cleared for night driving, and someone to talk to who didn't glance at their phone mid-sentence. That was the whole job. The care my family had assigned me was a costume they'd put on him because a burden needs tending and tending needs a nurse, and the nurse was free. After lunch, he wiped his hands, reached into his shirt pocket and set an index card on the table. Across the top in his draftsman's block letters, 7 days below it a numbered list, 1 line per day. Some I could read upside down, Rosie, Walt, the shop. Some were just initials. The last line said, December 31st, 9 a.m. GH. What's GH? I asked. He slid the card back into his pocket like a man closing a drawer. Day 7, he said. You'll be there. Here's what got me. And I didn't say it out loud. He'd written that card before Christmas Eve, before the note on the mantel. My family thought they'd sprung a trap on me, and my grandfather had responded by writing an itinerary. Whatever this week actually was, it hadn't surprised him at all. And that more than the note is what kept me up that night. The day after Christmas, my mother called not to apologize. I want to be clear that apology was never on the table, not even as a garnish. She called to issue instructions. There was a pill, which was wrong. There was a list of foods Grandpa was supposed to eat, which he hates. There was a reminder not to let him overdo it from a woman, who could not have told you his cardiologist's name if the answer won her the cruise. I listened the way I listened to difficult families at work, hand flat on the counter. And when she paused for breath, I asked the only question I actually had. Mom, why didn't anyone ask me? And I need you to understand her tone when she answered because it wasn't cruel. It was surprised. Surprised the way you'd be if the dishwasher asked why it was doing the dishes. That's what you're for, honey. Then she moved on to the weather in Vienna. It's beautiful, apparently. Cold but magical. The hotel had upgraded them, and there was a connecting suite for Mackenzie's mother, who I learned in that same breezy sentence, had been invited along in October. Mackenzie's mother had a suite on the Danube. I had a pill on the back of a calendar page. I got off the phone and stood looking at it, and I honestly couldn't tell you what I felt because the professional in me was busy filing it. This is the system. This is your station. This is what happens when you ask the system a question. Behind me, Grandpa George had appeared in the kitchen doorway with his coat already on. Wear something decent tomorrow, he said. We have an appointment. He didn't say with whom. Day 2 on the card, just said truth. That afternoon, he had me drive him through town first, past Warren Tool and Die, the machine shop he'd owned for 40 years, now a vape shop with his signs, ghosts still readable in the brick. He looked at it the way you look at a photo of yourself in a uniform. Then he directed me out past the edge of Harlow Bend, turn by turn, no explanations until we crested the rise on County Road 12, and the horizon turned into a wall, a distribution center. One of those quarter-mile monsters, white as a hospital, trucks stacked at 40 dock doors, its parking lot bigger than our downtown. It had gone up about 8 years ago on what used to be corn. My whole life that stretch had been corn. You know whose land that was? He asked. I said, one of the old farm families probably. He nodded slowly, watching the trucks. It belonged to an old man who knew how to keep his mouth shut, he said. People think land only grows corn. Then he told me to take the long way back, and that was the whole conversation. And I chewed on it for miles because my grandfather does not narrate scenery. He was showing me a fact the way he used to show apprentices a blueprint. Here, look, don't make me say it twice. I didn't dare finish the thought out loud. That night, brushing my teeth, I heard him on the kitchen phone using a voice I'd never heard from him. Flat, quick, a business voice. The 31st. Both sets like we discussed. No, she'll be with me. A pause. Because I'm sure, been sure for 2 months. I stood in the hallway with my toothbrush like a burglar in my own family's house, understanding exactly one thing. This week was a machine. It was already running, and my grandfather had built it. The appointment was at an elder law office in the county seat, 20 minutes of 2-lane roadway, a converted house with a brass plate. Gail Howe, attorney at law. At the door, Grandpa paused with his hand on the rail, and looked at me. And there it was again. Ready? And I said yes with the growing suspicion that I kept signing a contract nobody would let me read. Gail Howe turned out to be a compact woman around 55 with reading glasses on a chain, and the warmth of a well-maintained filing cabinet, which I mean as a compliment. What she said in the first 5 minutes rearranged my whole week. My grandfather had been her client since October. October before the cruise was ever mentioned to me, before the note, before any of it. Together they had rebuilt his entire estate plan, a restated trust, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare directive. All of it drafted, reviewed, ready. Today's meeting existed for one item only, and the item was me. George would like to name you his agent, Gail said. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and successor trustee. He'd like to know if you'll accept. I did the thing I do, the thing I've done my whole life. I deflected. Shouldn't that be Dad or Dean? I'm just, and my grandfather cut me off without raising his voice the way he'd cut a bolt, because I need someone who looks at me and sees a man, he said, not inventory. Gail let that sit, then added, dry as a receipt. Whether you accept or not, everything gets signed on the 31st at 9 o'clock. He simply wants you to sign with him. I asked for time to think. They gave me until the 31st. On the drive back, I finally asked him what was happening on day 7. He watched the fields go by. Housekeeping, he said. That same afternoon, he made me drive 50 minutes into Columbus to visit a friend. And the friend came with a campus, Bellamy Court, independent living cottages for seniors, brick paths, raised garden beds put to sleep for winter, a pool schedule posted like a train ticket. The friend was Walt Okafor, 80, retired postmaster, my grandfather's chess opponent of 30 years, who met us at his cottage door wearing a Christmas sweater with a chess knight on it and immediately showed me his garden like I was considering the neighborhood, which it turned out someone was. Over coffee, Walt said the thing my grandfather had apparently driven me there to hear because Grandpa George delegates his bombshells. So you seen George's unit yet? 2 doors down, the one with the good porch. I looked at my grandfather. My grandfather looked at his coffee with the expression of a man who finds his coffee fascinating. He had put a deposit on a cottage in November. He was moving in January. You're selling the house? I said, and he answered without a flicker. My house. I'm 82, Thea. I'm not going to die being the most interesting thing in someone else's museum. I started to say something about my parents and stopped because the sentence I'd been about to say was, where will they live? And some professional instinct told me I'd just found the edge of something enormous. Quick pause and I'm asking honestly, is there someone in your family everyone just assumes will handle it? The care, the holidays, the hard parts without anyone ever asking her. If that's you, tell me in the comments how long it's been going on because I'd stopped counting at 10 years. Back then, I still thought the for ale sign would be the biggest shock of the week. It wasn't even close. The next morning, I went looking for his Medicare card. A pharmacy needed it for a refill. Ordinary nurse errand, and I opened the kitchen desk drawer where that house has kept its paperwork since before I was born. The folder wasn't hidden. That's the detail I keep coming back to. It wasn't even hidden, unlabeled, sitting on top of the stamps. Inside, a glossy brochure for Crestline Manor. A secure memory care community. All soft focus hallways and locked doors described as peace of mind. Under it, a receipt, waitlist deposit, $5,000, dated December 12th, signed by Carol Warren, paid with a check from Dean's company account. And under that one page of notes in my mother's tidy meeting handwriting from a consultation, with some estate outfit 2 towns, over bullet points capacity how assessed conservatorship physician's house title timing of transfer. I read it 3 times standing up memory care, is a locked unit, and my grandfather had just beaten me at Gene Rummy 2 nights running. There was no diagnosis in that folder because there was no diagnosis anywhere. There was a plan and the plan had a sequence. First the room, then the doctor's opinions they'd shop for, then the house, and the deposit was 12 days old. I heard him come into the kitchen behind me, and when I turned, he wasn't surprised. And his lack of surprise told me the rest before he said it. I found it in November, he said, looking for stamps. November, the month he hired Gail Hutau, the month he put a deposit on a cottage near Walt. The month Reddy was born. My family thought they'd left him home like luggage while the real decisions got made over strudel in Vienna. He'd been making the real decisions for 2 months. He poured himself coffee calm as a Sunday. Now you get to decide, he said, whether you want to see the rest of it. The rest of it started at noon, when a silver SUV pulled into the driveway, and a woman in a red coat got out with a lockbox and a clipboard. Dana Kessler, realtor. My grandfather had signed the listing agreement before the holiday. Today was photos and the sign. I watched her move through the rooms with a camera while Grandpa George sat in his rocking chair in the middle of the emptying living room, like a king in a country he was done with. Dana lowered her camera once. "You're sure about this, Mr. Warren?" He rocked once, deliberately, and the old floor creaked under the runners. "Photograph the chair too," he said. "It goes with me, not with the house." At 2 o'clock, the sign went into the frozen front yard. 2 mallet blows, done for sale. 40 minutes later, a neighbor who has known my mother for 20 years took a picture of it over the fence, and sent it to Vienna, because small towns have their own fiber optic network, and it runs on casserole dishes. At 3 o'clock, my phone began to detonate. 11 missed calls in 90 minutes. The family group chat, which 2 days earlier had been hot chocolate photos from a Christmas market, turned into capital letters. What is happening? Call me now. Thea, answer your phone. What did you do? That last one from Dean. What did you do? Because in the Warren operating system, Grandpa wasn't capable of doing things. Things were done to him, and I was the nearest pair of hands. I didn't answer any of it that hour. I made him lunch. But there was one voicemail I played twice from my father. And what stopped me wasn't anything he said. It was his voice. My dad sounded scared. Dean called at 4 and I put him on speaker at the kitchen table because Grandpa pointed at the phone, and then at the table like a judge seating a witness. My brother opened with concern. Grandpa's confused. He'd never sell the house. Are you watching him? And held that channel for about 90 seconds before the signal underneath broke through. The house it emerged was not a house. It was collateral. Dean's company was carrying a bank note. $180,000 due for renewal in February. And Dean, I learned in real time, had been assuring his loan officer for 2 years that there were family assets behind him. An inheritance, a backstop. That house is this family's future. Thea, you're letting a confused old man burn down my kid's future. Do you get that? My grandfather listened to himself be discussed like a leaking roof, expressionless, turning his coffee cup a quarter turn at a time. I said, Grandpa could hear him. There was a pause. You could have parked a truck in. And then Dean said, softer, the worst sentence he's ever said. Then put him somewhere he can't hear. And let's talk like adults. An hour later, Aunt Paula, my mother's sister, 62, casserole diplomacy, appeared on the porch with a dish and a mission, and stood in the doorway, telling me the family was worried sick. That this was all very hard on my mother, and then, patting my arm, delivered the line she'd been sent with. Your mother's right, honey. It's what you're for. It the word doing all the work. I thanked her for the casserole, and closed the door. And through the window, I watched her walk to her car, and I understood that the whole town had my job description memorized. Everyone had learned my part before I did. That night, digging in my overnight bag for a phone charger, I knocked loose the envelope I'd been carrying around for 3 weeks, like a guilty conscience, and it slid out onto the kitchen floor between us. Cream paper, good stock. The Astor House logo in the corner. A new residential hospice opening in Columbus. 12 beds purpose-built. The kind of place I used to describe to my burned-out coworkers the way other people describe beach houses. The letter was an offer. Director of Clinical Care. Build the team. Write the protocols. Run the whole clinical side. Salary that made my current one look like a tip. Reply by January 5th. It was dated December 8th, and I had not answered it. And every draft of the refusal I'd composed in my head began the same way. It's just not a good time with everything at home. My grandfather picked it up off the floor. He did not ask permission. 82 comes with privileges. Put on his reading glasses and read it start to finish, while I stood there feeling 14. Then he walked to the refrigerator, took down the little cow-shaped magnet that had held Grandma Rosie's grocery list for 40 years, and pinned my offer letter dead center on the freezer door where you couldn't reach the milk without facing it. It stays there, he said, until you answer it. And you don't answer to your mother or to me or to this house. You answer to yourself. I started arguing on reflex. The move in January, my parents, everything up in the air. Someone has to. And he cut me off with one sentence mild as milk that went in like a blade. You're reading your mother's lines, Thea. I stopped talking. He went to bed. And I stood in front of that refrigerator for a long time. Cream paper, cow magnet, the hum of the compressor. While somewhere over the Atlantic my family slept business class on money, I was starting to understand had never been theirs, and the letter just hung there asking. Day 5 on the card said Rosie. So we bought carnations, her flower no debate permitted, and I drove him to the cemetery on the hill north of town. He changed the old flowers, wiped the headstone with a cloth he'd brought for the purpose, and then stood with his hand on the granite, and told me a story I'd never heard about my mother, Carol, before she was the plant manager. She was the one who took care of her mother, the strokes, the 11 years bent into that bed. But she'd been doing it alone for years before it moved to our house. And Aunt Paula and their brother came home twice a year, holidays only, and got thanked at church for being such devoted children, while my mother emptied bed pans and learned to sleep sitting up. When your other grandma finally passed, he said, her brother and sister came to the funeral, split up the good china in the parking lot, and drove off. Nobody held your mother's coat. I watched it happen. He straightened a carnation stem. Your mom stood exactly where you're standing, Thea, and then she learned the wrong lesson from it. She decided suffering was the membership fee. She'd paid hers, so somebody was always going to owe theirs. He was quiet a moment, and the wind moved the dead grass, and when he spoke again, he wasn't really talking to me, or maybe only to me. They didn't lose you, Thea. They spent you. I stood there among the graves, a woman who explains death to strangers for a living. And for once I had nothing to offer. He patted the headstone like an old dog's flank. Your grandmother made me promise her something before she went, he said, heading down the row. Tomorrow, I'll show you what I did about it. Fair warning. Sit down for it. That evening, the pressure arrived in stages, like weather. First, a voicemail from my mother that ran for minutes and traveled through 3 climates, weeping, then dictating, then at the end in the voice she uses for final notices. If you don't stop this insanity, Thea, the family is going to have to do something about your grandfather's condition and about you. About you. I've worked elder care long enough to translate that instantly. His condition meant paperwork, and about you meant they'd found a way to aim it at my license. An hour later, Mackenzie's name lit up the group chat with screenshots of flight changes. And then my phone rang from a number I recognized, and my stomach recognized faster. The county sheriff's non-emergency line. A courtesy heads-up from a dispatcher. They'd received a request for a welfare check on a George Warren of Burwood Lane. Caller reported an elderly man being isolated from his family by a granddaughter who controls his medications. The caller had placed the request from overseas. Vienna, one presumes, between the opera and dessert. My whole professional life, welfare checks have been a tool I revere. I've requested them. I've prayed over them. Watching my own family pick that tool up and swing. It at me was like watching someone use a stethoscope as a club. My reflex was pure nurse. Call his physician in the morning. Get a capacity letter. Build the file. Armor up. Grandpa George vetoed it from his chair without looking up from the sports page. No, I'm not going to prove I'm sane to people who never once asked me a question. Let them knock. So we waited. And I hated it. And at 8 o'clock sharp, headlights swept the living room wall. A county cruiser easing into the driveway. Light bar dark, and my grandfather smiled, stood, and put the coffee on. Deputy Merrick was maybe 30, polite as a funeral, and clearly braced for something sad. What he got instead was George Warren in full command of a coffee pot. Within 10 minutes, my grandfather had walked him through the date, the president, the Browns' latest self-inflicted loss, the name and dosage of both his medications, and this part he did slowly with relish, the appointment card from Gail Hutto's office, made by him in his handwriting on his kitchen calendar. My granddaughter drives me because of my eyes, he said. Cataracts. If she's controlling my medication, she's doing a poor job of it. I take them wrong constantly just to feel alive. The deputy laughed before he could stop himself, apologized for the intrusion, complimented the coffee like it was policy, and was gone in under 15 minutes. Anticlimax, right. Except when the cruiser's tail lights cleared the mailbox, I sat down at the kitchen table and felt the cold arrive late, the way it does after a near miss on the highway. Because a report now existed. Somewhere in a county system, there was a line of text pairing my name, a hospice nurse's name, with the words, isolating an elderly relative. And lines of text like that don't evaporate. They wait. Anyone who works around vulnerable adults will tell you the accusation is the injury. Unsubstantiated is just the bandage. From now on, every kind thing I did for this man could be redescribed by my family as control. My grandfather set a fresh cup in front of me and read my face like a gauge. Snorts, now you understand why it has to be official. He said, signatures, notary, the whole boring parade. He sat. Paperwork is offense, Thea. Love won't keep family out of your pasture. Offense will. Then he glanced at the attached case by his chair and back at me. Tomorrow the fence. Day 6. After breakfast, he set the leather attaché case on the kitchen table, spun the little brass dials, and opened it toward me the way you'd open a hymnal to the right page. On top, the trust documents thick as a phone book flagged with signature tabs. Under them, a single page in his block handwriting titled for Thea, plain English. And that plain English page is where I learned who my grandfather was. The land out on County Road 12, the corn, the horizon, the distribution center white as a hospital, had been 212 acres assembled quietly across the 1970s, held in an LLC he'd named Rosemary Land Company after my grandmother. 9 years ago, when the logistics people came hunting for flat ground near the interstate, George Warren, retired machinist, coupon user, a man who resold his boots, sold it to them for $16.4 million. Then he'd left it alone in index funds and treasuries for 9 years, spending none of it, telling no one, while it grew past 21 million. I asked him when I could produce sound. Why the silence? He looked at the rocking chair in the living room. Because I watched what the little money did, he said. Dean borrowed $67,000 from me over 8 years, and lost the ability to see me as anything but a balance. Your dad watched him do it and said nothing, which is its own answer. Your mother put me on the expense side of her ledger 20 years ago. He shut the case gently. The night before your grandmother died, she made me promise. Don't let the money raise the kids. So I let it sit, and I watched who kept showing up with nothing to inherit but my company. He nodded at me. One nod machine. Turns out it was the one they billed for it. Then he walked me through the trust itself in the voice. He must have used reading blueprints because this document was one load-bearing walls and all. The bulk of the estate would fund something called the Astor Endowment, a charitable foundation for hospice and caregiver support with a founding trustee named in black and white. Me a personal share for me besides large enough that I stopped hearing for a few seconds for my dad, and for Dean $400,000 each held in trust paid out over 5 years steady as a pension for Dean's kids. Education accounts already opened and stitched through all of it. The clause Gail Hutau had apparently polished like a lens. A no contest clause challenge any piece of this plan in any court, and your share goes to zero, and in Ohio Gail had warned him cheerfully the courts enforce those clauses with no exception for good intention. Sue and lose everything guaranteed. The condition isn't cruelty, Grandpa said. It's a leash for people who only behave on one. And me, I did the thing I have done at every table I've ever sat at. I tried to give my chair away. I heard myself saying I didn't want it, that it should go to Dad, to Dean. Split it. I don't need. And my grandfather brought his hand down flat on the table, the only sharp sound he made all week. Stop. He let the quiet reset. I am not paying you, Thea. I am seeing you. Learn the difference before you hold the keys to a building full of dying people because they will need you to know it. I went and stood at the refrigerator. Cream paper, cow magnet, the compressors hum, and behind me I heard the rocking chair take up its slow creak, patient as a clock, waiting to find out what I was for. That night, the group chat announced in my mother's punctuation that the family was cutting the trip short to come home and handle this as a family. Wheels down. December 31st, late afternoon. 12 days had become 8. $47,000 of non-refundable had suddenly found its refund. Fear does math faster than love. And then an hour later came the most precise blow of the entire week. And it didn't come from my mother. It came from Mackenzie on the private sister-in-law channel we'd kept for birthdays and casseroles. No accusations. A photo of my niece and nephew asleep against each other on the plane and under it. I know how much you love them. Please don't let Grandpa do something that takes away their future. You're the only one he listens to. I sat with my thumb over the keyboard for a long time. I typed, "We both know his mind is fine." And deleted it. Typed, "Their future was never his job to fund." Deleted it. Typed, "Ask your husband where $67,000 went." Deleted that one fast. Typed nothing because here's what that message actually was. And knowing it didn't weaken it. It was the family system routing around a failure. The guilt hadn't worked at the mother node, so the network found the aunt node. They'd aimed the children at me. The exact two people in that family I'd protect with my hands. And the ask hidden under the lullaby photo was the same ask it had always been. Be the caretaker of our consequences. I put the phone face down on the counter next to the pill organizer, and I looked at the letter on the refrigerator for a while instead. Reply by January 5th. In the morning it would be day 7. December 31st, 10 minutes to 9. Gale Hut's parking lot. Frost on the windshield of every car but ours. My grandfather made no move to get out. Instead, he took the index card from his shirt pocket and held it where I could see it. 7 days, 6 lines crossed off in pencil, 1 line waiting. December 31st, 9 a.m. Here's the truth, he said. I can do this alone. Gail can be trustee for hire. There are banks for this. Nothing in that building needs you. He tapped the card once against his knee. But everything in it wants you, so I'm asking the last time, the same way I asked the first night. He looked at me, 82 years old, cataract lenses, eyes like calipers. Ready? And I thought about the drawer with the Crestline receipt, in my mother's proud handwriting. I thought about a deputy's headlights on the living room wall, and a report in a county system with my name spelled correctly. I thought about 34 years of being the one they billed, and about a man who'd watched who kept showing up when there was nothing to inherit but him. Yes, I said. And this time I knew exactly what I was agreeing to inside. It took 40 minutes and 3 pens. Power of attorney proxy successor trustee. My signature next to his. Page after page, a notary stamping like a slow heartbeat. And with every stamp, I felt a door I'd propped open my whole life swing shut. The door where someday they ask instead of a sign. And I say yes. And that's how I finally get to be family. Paper doesn't leave doors like that ajar. When it was done, Gail squared the stack and allowed herself 1 line dry as dust. Congratulations. As of this morning, you're the most legally hated woman in your family. She wasn't wrong. She also wasn't done. She slid 1 more folder across the desk, a purchase offer Dana Kessler had sent over that morning for George to review. A cash buyer closing in February, deposit on Tuesday. Dana had warned him the acreage would move fast. Even she hadn't guessed 3 days. He read it twice and signed. Dean beat his own parents home. He'd changed to an earlier connection in Newark. Alone, no Mackenzie, no kids, because whatever else my brother is, he has a bloodhound's nose for money in motion. And it had him through that front door by 2 in the afternoon, coat still on, shouting before his eyes adjusted, half-packed boxes in the hallway, the for sale sign in the yard, Grandpa's 2 suitcases standing by the door like patient soldiers. Dean took inventory and went straight to the speech. This house was the family's legacy. This was elder abuse. He would get lawyers. He would get doctors. He would. And my grandfather, in the rocking chair with his afternoon tea, did the single most quietly violent thing I have ever watched a man do to another man. He took a worn leather notebook off the side table, and began to read from it. Dates, amounts. March, 8 years ago, 12,000. Truck engine. October 7 years ago 9,000 payroll gap 4,611 on down the years every loan every rescue $67,000 in his patient draftsman's and each entry initialed. Dean's mouth opened and gradually forgot why. "You told the bank you had family assets," Grandpa said, closing the cover. "I'm the family assets, Dean, and I remember everything. I just never once made you feel it." He set the notebook down and picked his tea back up. "So let's retire the word confused." My brother stood in the middle of that living room, and I watched it hit him. The whole strategy, the doctors they'd shop, the capacity angle, all of it dying in a room where an 82-year-old man could recite 8 years of Dean's failures to the dollar. Outside, a second car crunched into the driveway. My parents were home. They came in still smelling like an airplane, wheeling their suitcases over the threshold of a house that had a lockbox on the doorknob now. And I watched my mother clock it all in a single sweep. Boxes, sign, suitcases, me like a manager walking a fire-damaged floor. She did not shout. I want to give her that. Carol Warren has never once needed volume. She went straight to the kitchen, her kitchen, our National Theater, and set herself at the table in her seat, and began the way professionals begin. Everyone's exhausted. Everyone loves each other. Let's talk like a family. My father shook Grandpa's hand. Hello. Shook his hand after 8 days and an ocean like a man greeting a client he'd wronged, and stood against the counter where he has always stood. And for a while it was almost civilized until Grandpa mentioned conversationally that the house had an accepted offer as of that morning. Cash buyer deposit on Tuesday, and my mother's composure cracked down a seam I'd never seen. She didn't yell even then. She did something worse. She got up from the table, crossed her own kitchen floor, and went down on her knees in front of his chair. My mother, 58 years old, on the linoleum she'd waxed for 21 years, and begged, "Think of Rick. Think of the grandkids. Think of everything we've given up to keep this family running." She gripped the armrest of the rocking chair like a railing on a listing ship. It was a real beg. I've seen enough deathbed bargaining to certify it. And it went on for a full 2 minutes. And here is the entire tragedy of my family in one observation. In all of it, every plea, every tear, not one person in that kitchen asked the old man a single question about what he wanted. She begged the way you'd beg an ATM that was eating your card. And when the begging didn't move him, he'd covered her hand with his and said gently, "Get up, Carol. The floor is cold." Which was somehow more final than any refusal. My mother stood, smoothed her slacks, wiped her face with one efficient pass, and I watched the artillery rotate away from him onto me. She pulled out the chair across from mine, and sat the way she sits when a meeting is beginning, hands flat on the table, wedding ring clicking once on the wood. Dean drifted in from the living room, and took the doorway. My father studied the countertop grain. The whole room reorganized itself around a new agenda item. And the agenda item was Thea. Before she said a word, my grandfather caught my eye over her shoulder. He didn't move from the chair. He asked it with his face this time. One eyebrow, a half-an tilt of the head, the question he'd spent all week teaching me the real size of. Ready? Let me pause here for one breath, because some of you have been in this chair. If you have ever had to choose between being loved and being useful, if your family has ever offered you a seat at the table with the price tag still hanging off it, then this next part belongs to you as much as me. Stay with me. My mother took a breath and smiled at me with genuine warmth, which is the part that still gets me, and opened the negotiation for my life. Sweetheart, she said. Let's fix this. You're the only one who can. Her offer was a masterpiece of its genre, and I say that with the respect one professional owes another. She began with my childhood, how she'd always known I was the strong one, the giver, the one God built for other people. She toured the family's sacrifices. Dad's back, Dean's kids, her own mother, 11 years. Nobody knows what that costs, and then the terms laid out as tenderly as a table setting. Talk to him, Thea. He listens to you. Get him to pause the sale. Revisit the paperwork. Revisit. A word with gloves on. And this whole ugly week goes in the drawer and the family heals. You'd be doing what you do best, honey. Taking care of everyone. Dean from the doorway translated it into his native language. You're his nurse. Make him see sense. And that is the moment my grandfather stood up out of the rocking chair, crossed to the kitchen, and laid the unlabeled folder on the table in front of my father like a card player calmly ruining an evening. The brochure slid half out on its own. Secure Memory Care Community. My mother's face did something complicated. Dean did something simpler. But the face I couldn't stop watching was my dad's. Because my dad, reading the deposit receipt with his coat still on, went white in a way you cannot perform. He hadn't known. Whatever committee had met on December 12th, signed Carol, funded by a check from Dean's company account, my father hadn't been in the room, and now he was learning in front of witnesses what his wife and son had planned for his own father 12 days before they all flew to Vienna. Rick, my grandfather said, not unkindly, ask your wife what the deposit was holding. Ask her what the notes about my capacity were for. The kitchen went so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator, and pinned to it, in the corner of every eye in that room, a cream-colored letter under a cow-shaped magnet, waiting its turn. Cornered people either collapse or reveal themselves, and my mother has never once collapsed. She stood, pushed the folder away with 2 fingers, and made her closing argument. Not an apology, a creed. Yes, I planned ahead. Somebody in this family has always had to be the one who plans, and it has always been me. Her voice didn't waver. It took on rivets. I took care of my mother for 11 years. 11, my brother and sister came home for Christmas, and got called angels while I slept in a chair. Nobody held my coat at the funeral, so don't you dare look at me like a criminal for being realistic about an old man's future. And then she turned to me and her voice went soft, which in my mother is maximum force. And she laid the family's constitution on the table where the folder had been. A family works because everyone does their part. Thea, your dad provides, Dean builds, I decide, and you care. That's the machine, sweetheart. That's what you're for. There it was out loud at last after 34 years. My job description read into the record by the woman who wrote it. What answered her wasn't me. It was the creak of floorboards as my grandfather came to stand beside my chair. Careful with the word part, Carol, he said in his shop voice, the one that used to carry over lathes. This house is the smallest part of what I own, and none of it, not $1 of it, is on your chore chart. Silence, the specific kind that follows arithmetic nobody can do. It was Dean who moved first, of course. Phone already out, thumbs flying, county land records, the LLC, the transfer, 9 years old, and public the entire time. 16.4 million from a standing start. And my brother read the number off his screen out loud in the voice of a man identifying his own accident. He looked up at Grandpa, then at the rocking chair, then finally everyone always finally at me. What happened next happened to me all at once for the first time in my life. My entire family needed to hear what I would say. Dean recalibrated in real time. I watched the sneer liquefy into warmth mid-sentence, watched Sis re-enter his vocabulary after a decade on the bench. My mother leaned in with the offer sweetened. Stay, honey. Help us through this. Things will be different. I promise you, this family will be different. You'll be at the center of it. Every word I had waited 34 years to hear, served hot the moment I held something they wanted. And my grandfather. This is the part one didn't expect. Opened the far door instead of closing it. Your share is yours, Thea, he said quietly. The day it comes to you, you can split it with them down to the last dime. I won't stop you. It's not a test. He meant it. That's what made it a real choice. I could buy my way into this family after all. The price was posted. The seller was motivated. And the currency was finally in my hands. And God helped me. The 6-year-old in me who'd waited at every window reached for the pen. I stood up. I walked past my mother's chair to the refrigerator. And I took down the cow magnet, and I took down the letter. Cream paper. 3 weeks of thumb-softened corners. There's a pen in a jar of spoons on that counter. It has been there since I was in middle school. It was there when I learned to forge my own permission slips because everyone was busy. I clicked it, and on the kitchen table where I'd crushed pills and filled organizers and once at 16 cried into a nursing textbook, I signed the acceptance of the Astor House offer, Director of Clinical Care, dated it, photographed it, and sent it to the medical director's email before I sat back down. Then I gave my family my answer in the tone I use for care plans because that's what it was. I take over at Astor House in February. Grandpa moves to Bellamy Court next week. His decision made in November. And I'll be driving the truck. From today, I hold his power of attorney and his healthcare proxy. So any questions about the house, the trust or his condition go to Gail Hutt's office. And Mom. I looked at her, and I made sure my voice stayed level. And it did all the way through. I finally know what I'm for. It was never this. She started to speak. I finished. I'm done being spent. The room went off in sequence like ice cracking across a pond. Dean first, loudest, shortest. The bank, February. You're killing my company. Well, fight this. And it was. My grandfather who answered him, still standing, hand resting on the back of my chair. Now fight it and read it first, he said. There's a clause in that trust with your name on it. Contest anything and your share goes to zero. And Ohio courts don't make exceptions for sons who suddenly discover their conscience. Gail's very proud of the drafting. Then, while Dean was still buffering, my grandfather did the thing that I need you to understand was not softness because it had architecture. He issued mercy with fences around it. The $67,000 in the leather notebook forgiven. Wiped. A last Christmas gift from a grandfather to a grandson because your kid shouldn't inherit your ledger. $400,000 each for Dean, and my dad in trust. 5 years steady, a floor, not a faucet. The education accounts for the kids already funded, untouchable by anyone's business loans. And for my parents, the house closes in February, but nobody sleeps outside. They'd have until June 1st to relocate, with the first year of a rental paid through the trustee. No one in this family will be on the street, he said. And then he looked around the kitchen slowly, one face at a time, the way he used to check a finished part against the drawing. But no one in this family lives in my pocket again either. It was, I would testify, more than any of us had coming. My mother didn't see it that way. Losing the money was survivable. What she could not survive was the machine being switched off in front of her. She looked at the suitcases by the door, at her father-in-law, and finally at me. And she delivered the last line of the old Constitution with the cold precision of a woman who has never once bluffed. If you walk out that door with him, Thea, don't come back through it. And my father. My father put down the deposit receipt and said her name, Carol. Just her name with 21 years of rent in it. Then he looked at the floor and the word just ended. Nowhere, the way it always had. That silence was the only goodbye I got. It was also the most honest thing anyone in that kitchen had said to me all night. I carried the suitcases, mine and his. And I want you to sit with that picture because I had spent my whole life carrying things for that family. And this was the first time in 34 years I was carrying them for the right person. Grandpa George put on his good coat, took a last lap of the living room, and stopped at the rocking chair. He didn't sit. He sat it rocking with one hand, listened to the runners creak over the old floor once, twice, and then walked out of the house he'd owned for 54 years without looking at anything else in it. It was 11:30 on New Year's Eve. Somewhere over Harlow Bend, some kid was already setting off fireworks in a field. Single pops with long gaps, like the town was clearing its throat before midnight. We were on the county road with the heater ticking when he finally spoke. You just lost the thing you spent your whole life guarding. Not a question. The men diagnoses like I do. I know, I said. The wheel was cold under my hands, and my eyes were burning. And at the next red light, the only red light between his old life and his new one, I cried for about 15 seconds. Nurse crying metered and budgeted. And then the light turned green and I drove. It was never yours to keep, Thea, he said, watching the dark fields go by. They spent it a long time ago. At Bellamy Court, Walt had left the porch light on and a note on the guest suite door. Saw the news, such as it travels. Inside, 2 cans of ginger ale on the counter and his chessboard set up mid-aim, because Walt Okafor believes there is no catastrophe a standing chess game cannot outlast. Grandpa was asleep by midnight. 82 forgives you nothing on bedtime, even on the night you win. I stood at the window with the ginger ale I didn't open, and watched the year change over a parking lot full of old people's sensible cars. And I did inventory because that's what I'm trained to do at end of shift. Lost my mother in every way that had ever been on offer. My seat at a table that had billed me for it. The person I'd been, the indispensable one, the one they could always call. And in the place where all of that had sat, there wasn't a wound. There was room. 34 years. And it was the first quiet in my chest I could remember that didn't have a shift attached. Happy New Year, I thought to both of us, all 3 counting the chair. Here's the accounting. Because stories like mine end in paperwork, and I've come to find that comforting. The house closed in February. A young family, 3 kids, a swing set going up before the ink dried, which felt less like loss and more like a building getting honest work again. My parents moved in May to a rental on the east side of town. No apology has ever arrived. I've stopped listening for the mail. Dean did not sue. The no contest clause did what no amount of family feeling had ever done. It made my brother behave. And the $400,000 dripped out sensibly over 5 years saved his company in a way one big check never would have. He has not said thank you. I did not expect him to. Mackenzie sends pictures of the kids sometimes, and I answer everyone because those 2 owe nobody's debts, and never will if I can help it. And in October, the Astor House opened its doors in Columbus. 12 beds, big windows, protocols with my fingerprints on every page. And in the lobby, there's a small brass plaque that the residents' families walk past 100 times a day. The Astor Endowment in memory of Rosemary Warren, Grandma Rosie, who made a man promise not to let the money raise the kids. It's raising something better now. He keeps a photo of the plaque in his wallet, folded like a betting slip. In April, my mother left me a voicemail. I stood in the Astor House parking lot and listened to the whole thing twice, because I wanted to be fair to it. It was not an apology. It was a request. Dad needed a cardiac scan. The hospital system was confusing. I knew how these places worked, and could I just handle it? The old machine reaching for its favorite part. I'll tell you exactly what I did because this part matters more than the money ever did. I didn't rage and I didn't cave. I texted her the names and numbers of 3 excellent medical transport and patient advocate services in the county, and the direct line for the hospital's care coordinator. And I wrote, they'll take good care of him. If you ever want to have dinner, just dinner. I'm around. She never answered. Aunt Paula posted something on Facebook that spring about young people today abandoning their families. I heard about it third and let it stay third, and the conveyor belt didn't stop when I stepped off it. It just doesn't run through me anymore. Turns out that's all boundaries ever meant. Last week was Christmas again. The cottage at Bellamy Court smelled like Rosie's pork roast because we made it together. I chopped. He seasoned. Nobody served anybody. Walt arrived precisely at noon with a pie and a rook he owed back. The rocking chair sits by the front window now, exactly where the light lands, and on the refrigerator under the cow magnet hangs a worn index card. 7 days, all 7 lines crossed off in pencil. I keep meaning to frame it. He says, framing things is how you stop using them. When the table was set, my grandfather looked it over, checked it against the drawing the way he does, and then he looked at me, and his eyes did the smile before his mouth got around to it. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," I said. And this time, I'd understood the question all along. If you take one thing from my story, take this. Being needed and being loved are not the same thing. The people who love you ask, and the people who use you assign, a note on a mantle, a for sale sign that ended a vacation, a $21 million secret that spent 9 years in a rocking chair. My family handed me a shift and my grandfather handed me a choice. And the whole difference between them was one question asked out loud. Ready? If you're the one your family assigns instead of asks, the nurse, the driver, the fixer, the one who always says yes, hear me. Your kindness is not a chore chart. Choose yourself once. And watch who panics. Then if this story found you, share it with the one who always says yes. Tell me your version in the comments and subscribe to Revenge Range. Quiet people stop being quiet here every single week.